Today we're going to start talking about jigs, and I'm going to show you some of the things that we do and how we use them and how I've made them. This is the jig for the peg head, and what I have here is another board. I've traced this out, this here, onto here, because the openings, the holes that I have here on the next peg head that I'm doing here are going to be smaller than what these are. I could plug these and then re-drill them, but I don't want to do that because I may use this too. So this is for a different set of tuners, and that's why I'm going to do that. So you're going to see me do that. We'll do that probably in the next day or two. This is looks like a piece of either striped ebony or Zirconi. I won't know until I run it through the thickness sander, which I'm going to do over there. This is right now at about 34 thousandths of an inch, maybe 35. I want to take it down to 250, which is a quarter of an inch, as you well know. But before I do that, I want to run it over the jointer here in order to make sure I've got a nice straight edge here that I just ran a sliver in my finger doing that. Got to be careful with that. And then here you can see I've got the square checking the fence before I do anything, because I don't want to lose the square on here. I'm not going to run it through on the flat. I'm only doing the sides because I need to have a good side so that when we line up this template that I got at StuMac, and I'm using the side on the Martin here that is 25.34, commonly known as 25.4, and that will give us the right scale length that we need for the guitar that we're building. Now, in order to make an adjustment on that later on, as you'll see, once I use the second jig to narrow it down and to get it all set to go, I'm going to bump it on the sander to take off 1 millimeter off the front, which will move everything forward slightly, and that will help keep everything playable up in here. Now, we're going to run this through the sander in just a minute, but before I do, I'm going to hit it on this. I'm going to get my T out of the way, and we'll get started on that right away. So let's do that. Oh man, this is like gasoline for an engine. This is really good stuff. You got to get some. So we use the jointer and we plane the edges of this. They're both nice and flat and square, so it's not going to sit on the saw cockeyed or anything like that. It's going to be fine. So what we're about to do is bring this down in thickness to about 1/4 of an inch, give or take a little. It won't matter whether it's slightly under or slightly over, but we're going to use the thickness sander to do that. We'll have several passes. I'll do a couple, and then we'll get on to the next jig. So what I have here is my calipers, which I will use to check to make sure I'm not taking this too far. So we'll start this up. It's going to get noisy in here, so I will keep that on for just a moment or two so you can see how this works, and then we'll proceed to get this thing done properly. All right, that's it. Let's get going. So here goes the sander. It's always safety first in the shop, right? this is the jig that we're going to use to cut the slots. This board is a piece of poplar, it's flat, and down in here is a small pin. It's a little nail that's about 1/16 of an inch in diameter, and it fits just above the 250,000 or the 1/4 inch fingerboard. And as you'll see here, and I'll show you this up close, as you'll see here, this board fits just underneath that nail that is sitting right here at the edge of the ruler, right in there. Okay? And it just sticks out enough. So this is perfectly flat all the way along here. There's no bulge or anything, and that's because we use this on the jointer. Now, I have already marked the 25.4 or 3.4, 25 3.4 scale length. This is a different size. This is 24.9 or 25, if you will. And I have marked this down here from the nut all down here, counting this until it's down to 22. So this will sit on here with double-sided tape, and it will end up being pushed in there. Now, that will get taped in place, and we want to make sure that it is flush all the way along here, so that when we bring this in, it's just going to fit ever so nicely. Now, the first cut is for the nut. That's where we're going to cut this thing off, so I want a little bit of extra over that, and then we start counting. So this becomes here, from this thumb to my finger. If you can, no, you can't see that. Let me look this way. This is the nut here. This is my first fret, my second fret, and my third. So we're moving like this all the way down until we get there. Now this is the saw blade that we're going to use. This is 24 thousandths of an inch in thickness. It's a 6-inch blade. It comes from High Mountain Tonewood Company. They're out west. And this is affordable. There are other people that make blades like this. Some of them are already thickened in here with just a small thin area out here. That's okay if you've got the $200 you want to spend on that. I just simply put a Forster stabilizer up against that when we put it in the table saw, so that it doesn't wobble as it's going through, that it's actually turning straight. So we're going to do that, and we're going to cut this board right now. So I'll go set up the saw, and we'll get that done. Now, whenever I'm working on anything in the way of a major table saw, router, whatever I happen to be working on, I was about to call it an appliance, which is probably a good word for it, I make sure that I'm unplugged. Don't plug this thing in, and don't work with it plugged in, so that you never have a problem. So we're going to take this off. There we go. This is the stabilizer I was talking about. Now this is a custom made plate that I did exactly for this purpose. As you can see, it's too high. It doesn't need to be that high, as you'll see. And we're coming down here until we're just going to cut a very tiny slot right in here. So let's measure that. I would like this a little less than halfway. That should be just about perfect. So that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. And if need be, because we're going to radius this like so, these edges are going to be lower, which means we're going to have to use our hand saw and just lower those edges ever so slightly before we put the binding on. Because all along here, once this is all tapered, I want to put shell all the way around the fingerboard here. So that's the plan, and we'll see how that works out. Okay, now I'll show you the setup for this, and we're ready to go. Now this is double-sided tape that I'm putting on here. Now, one thing I need to tell you. What you do here is you've determined which side you want on the top, because that's when you're cutting the slot. So this is my top, so I'm turning it down. So I'm going to put this double-sided tape on the underneath side that is actually going to be glued to the mahogany on the fingerboard. This is a Scotch brand 3M tape, double-sided. So now, here's my pin where my finger is, right in here. So I want this just past there because that's where the blade is coming up. I want to be able to cut that off by hand later. So I just need a little bit there. So when I take this and I set this in here and I make sure I keep this tight, I put it on the nut. Then I just press that down, and I know I can feel it riding up there, so I know I'm going to cut a little piece off here, and I've got this all flush all along here. It's all good to go. That's all there is to it. Now I've taken the end off here because I'm going to extend this right out to here. In fact, I probably need to move that further away. Yes, that'll be fine. All right, we're going to turn on the vacuum. So today we're featuring one template and one jig. And this is the template which we just used. This is for setting the slots into the actual fingerboard that we have here. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is put a taper on that fingerboard because we want it 1 3/4 inches up at the nut, and we want it approximately 2.2 or 2.25, 2 1/4 inches down here at the 14th. So what we have here is a tapered jig, and this is a neat little jig. It's not very big and it's not very wide, but boy is it powerful. Let me tell you, this thing is 4.5 inches wide. The thing is 23, 24 inches long. And what we have here at the end is a stop block. That's important because that's where the nut would be. So what happens is we take this and we put this in here like this, because this board here beside the brown one, this here is on a slant. It's on a taper, and I've moved it in here to the point of about 2.2 inches, 2 1/4. Now, I made it a little narrow on some of my previous guitars, and the way I did that was to simply put a piece of tape along here which pushes the board out more, so that the board actually ends up going out like this. So when you put the tape down in here, it pushes the board out. Well, I've taken that off because I want it just a tad wider, and I can plane that off later. So what we're going to do is take this to the saw, and we're going to put it in. We're going to make 2 cuts. This is going to be the first cut, the first taper, and then what we do is we move to the second taper. Now I've got a big 1 here and a big 2 here, a 1 here and a 2 here. So you can see that there's the 1, there's the 2, 1 and 2. These 2 screws let me adjust that. If you wanted, for example, a fingerboard that was 1 7/8, you could do that by just adjusting this. It's not an issue at all. So I'm not going to do that. Now we have cut this, and I know that this is the top where the nut is going to be going. So we're going to taper it this way, and then we're going to taper it this way. So we're going to put that in there at number 1, and we will push that down there like that, and that's all good. Now all we have to do is take that to the saw, and I'm going to saw it from this side down to here, and I'll use this as my guide for my hands to move it back and forth. So what do you say we go to the table saw and give that a go? So I'm back over here at the table saw, and we have adjusted the width here to the blade to represent this. So I've just got this here. So we're just going to end up cutting this little strip off here, and it's all good. You can hear the vacuum going, so we're set to go. Let's give it a shot. thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate you being here, and I will see you in another video. Now it is time for me to go up and have a cup of tea. I hope you'll do the same. English breakfast, anyone? See ya.